Okay, thank you so much for being with us tonight for one of our lovely chats with 60 Hour Shakespeare. Welcome on the 60 Hour Shakespeare YouTube channel. And let me introduce immediately the person who is honoring us with their presence tonight, Emily Carding. They are actor, theater maker, author, and in general, an artist, and we will explore your artistic life as much as you will allow us to tonight, Emily. But first of all, thank you for being with us tonight. And before we get straight into the questions for Emily, let me remind our audience that all the proceeds of tonight's talk are going to go for the Helping Hands charity. So thank you for joining us also in this good cause. 60 Hour Shakespeare supports as many charities as we can through Staging Shakespeare over the summer, and everything we do so also has this golden heart aim, apart from being, of course, celebrating our beloved Shakespeare. So audience, get ready with your burning questions for Emily, because you will have the chance to ask them later in the chat. And now, Emily, thank you for being with us. Emily is one of the leading Shakespearean contemporary actors. I'm not saying that, although I believe it, but very important critics are giving them this title. So you totally deserve it for sure. And they also are a published author and a workshop and seminar leader. And if you want to know more about their impressive CV, don't forget to check their website, because it's super fascinating. So, Emily, if you want to add something to my introduction about yourself.
No, that was lovely. Thank you so much. Thank you for inviting me to chat with you today.
No, it's a well deserved. I mean, I said just a little bit because I don't want to waste your time, because I think we have very interesting things to talk about. And so let's get straight into the questions. So the first one is pretty basic probably, but it's just to make our audience get a bit acquainted with your background. So how did you start your acting career, and especially your Shakespearean career? So what made you realize that you wanted to specialize in Shakespeare specifically?
I love that you think this is a basic question, and I'm just going to talk for an hour, because we didn't have theatre at my school. We had no drama at my school. There was nothing. So there was only English class where I encountered Shakespeare. And my parents are not particularly, they're not artistic or anything in any way, but when I first heard these words, and I was lucky enough to have one of my English teachers, Miss Pennell, I remember her name, of course, she was so bawdy, she obviously loved it, and she conveyed that love of it. But I seemed to be the only person in the class. I had a very working class background, and I seemed to be the only person who really got it and loved it and understood it immediately. It was something, it just felt like it resonated with me immediately, and I just wanted to feel those words really coming through me. And I remember pestering for anything, like an after-school club or anything. There was nothing. But it was Shakespeare that drove that feeling, that need that I wanted to act. I was a very shy child. I was very introverted, but that was that. And then I got taken to see a production of Macbeth at what was my local theatre at the time. I grew up around Stoke-on-Trent in Newcastle under Lyme, and there was a theatre, and there is a theatre there called the New Vic, which is a beautiful theatre in the Round. And I saw this fairly no-frills production of Macbeth. Didn't need celebrity names or anything. It was just, they just did the play, and they did it with love and with passion and with energy, and I just absolutely fell in love with that. And also, there was a school trip to the RSC to see Henry IV Part 1, with Robert Stevens as Falstaff and Michael Maloney as Hal. And again, just that energy on, I was like, oh, I want to do that. I want to do that. But I was very, very inexperienced, and it wasn't until I went to A-level college, which was the building next door, but it was an art college. I was also into fine arts and things. So I went and I did art, and a bit of classical studies, and a bit of TV and video and stuff. And I wanted to be a film director as well, which is something that perhaps later in life I may go back to. But I was able to do 1 year of like GCSE drama and the first year of A-level theatre. Quite towards the end, I was at that college for about 3 or 4 years doing various ridiculous. I would always study everything under the sun. And it was a chance meeting in a corridor that sent me to drama school between my art teacher and my drama teacher at the beginning, I think, of my 4th year. It was right at the beginning of that. And they were like, why are you still here? And my drama teacher's husband at the time worked at Bretton Hall, which was a drama school that used to exist up in the north of the country, in the beautiful countryside of West Yorkshire. If anybody knows the League of Gentlemen, Mark Gatiss and all that lot, that's where they went. And the space had opened up through clearing, and I auditioned, you know, a few days later, and term started. That was the Friday, and term started on the Monday. And before that, I hadn't been planning on going anywhere. So it was, I think we were talking before we went live about things that feel destined.
To be. Meant to be, yes.
And I'm like nodding fist because I know exactly what this is like. And that was one of those moments. I've had like a few of those in my life, but that was one that was like, this is where you're going here.
And it's impressive. They're always linked with Shakespeare, at least in our lives.
Yeah.
They seem to be so connected with Shakespeare. What are you trying to tell us, Will?
Yeah. But then the other one came after quite a long break away from it all. I did Cambridge Shakespeare Festival and a few bits like that, like first time round, but I did a few years of bits and bobs as an actor, but nothing huge. And then unexpectedly became pregnant, and so sort of gave up acting for a while. And this is when I started writing and creating more artwork, and I started creating the tarot decks and writing my books and all of this stuff, the more sort of esoteric, fine art based side of my work, for about 11 years, just, you know, at home. And I started to, once my kid became a bit older, and I started to feel this pull back towards Shakespeare and towards acting, always very specifically Shakespeare, although obviously I've done other stuff. And I was at that point I was living in Cornwall, and I remember looking and seeing whether there was maybe a postgrad thing that I could do, and there was Exeter University nearby, and I thought about it for a while, and then I was lying in bed, and it's one of those houses where you couldn't get a signal on your phone unless you held it above your head. So I was lying in bed and holding my phone like this above my head, looking at something or other. And I dropped it. It landed on my mouth. It's quite painful, banging in the teeth.
Yes.
And I picked my phone up again. And when I picked my phone up again, it was on the complete works of Shakespeare.
You see, it's incredible.
And I was like, okay, that's a sign. Let's apply. Let's have a look. And it just so happened that not only was there a postgrad at Exeter University, which was about an hour's drive for me, it was doable, but that it was specifically in staging Shakespeare. And I was like, boom.
That's it. That's it.
And so much better than going back to drama school or anything like that would have been, because I'd learned how to act, but I needed to sort of after 11 years, I needed to zhuzh everything back up again. But what that course did was give me the facility to make my own work, which has proven so valuable. And that's how I came back into it. And we started to, you know, there was the course material, which was a mixture of academic and practical, so we had all of that. But because we had access to the facilities, as well as the excitement of everything we were learning, bringing that all together and starting to make work while I was there over what was a 2-year MFA course, and the people that I met there, just meant that it was a seamless transition from that just into the world. Things that we made there went off to tour and just carried on. So even though I went through a painful divorce sort of towards the end of that, I just kept blasted through and carried on working. So I told you it'd be a long answer. There we are.
No, but this is exactly what we wanted. Also, because I think that in our audience, there always are actors, wannabe actors, student actors that are like, am I on the right track? Just ask Shakespeare. He will give you all the answers you need. I mean, we are two witnesses of this kind of phenomenon.
Well,
Okay.
trust yourself, trust
Absolutely.
the path in front of you, and make things happen. Don't sit and wait for things to happen, though.
Absolutely. Yeah.
In the world out there right now, it's very difficult. And if your tendency, if your instinct is to just sit and wait for your agent to call, or you've got to be proactive. You've got to get out there, get yourself seen, make stuff, invite people to it, get it, be
Absolutely.
proactive.
And
Yeah.
don't fear the no's, because among all those no's, at a certain point there will be this only one yes that will like prompt. I
Yeah,
think
the
new.
right doors will open, but you do have to go around and bang on all of them to find
Yeah,
out
yeah,
which
absolutely.
ones are going to let you in.
That's life.
Sometimes you'll stubbornly keep going back to that one door. You're like, but I want that one. But,
No. You
yeah.
need to knock all of them, and then the right one
Mm.
will open for you. Talking about the right doors, one door that opened to you and was a big success and is being a big success is a performance called Richard III, a one-person show that, correct me if I'm wrong, you just closed it, right? So it's a fascinating theatrical experiment. I mean, it's not an experiment, but it's kind of, because of course it's a one-person whole Shakespearean play. So I'm extremely interested in understanding, first of all, how the project began, what is interesting about this character, and why you decided to work on a full play around one single character, Richard III, of course, and how difficult it is to make a one-person show out of a whole play, and a very complicated one. So the floor is yours.
Great. Well, I'll add to that. To do Shakespeare as a one-person show in itself isn't especially experimental now, but what is experimental about Richard III, or innovative about Richard III one-person show, is that it involves the audience as the other characters. So that sort of audience participation, very directly bringing them into it, hadn't been done. I don't think anybody else is doing that either. So that was very much the experimental nature of it. Why Richard? I mean, Richard was the perfect character to start this sort of journey with, of experimenting with, smashing the fourth wall and bringing the audience in and making the audience complicit, because that's exactly what Richard does in the play. So if you take this very complicated play and just hone it down really to Richard as a character who is so compelling and so charming and so awful and so wicked and so funny and so in pain himself, such a complicated, beautiful, charismatic, compelling, rich character. If you bring it down to that, and all of the sort of the family drama and intricacy, if you give audience members name tags that show, so everybody can see who everybody is at any given point, and then you can point to them and say, to make my brother Clarence and the king in deadly hate, the one against the other, and you can point to them. You can make that 4 hours of play into a very clear hour and a very fun hour. And your hour as an audience member, as Hastings or Buckingham or Lady Anne or whatever, is going to be unlike any other that
Absolutely.
anybody else will ever experience. So each show, because it's a blending of, you know, myself as performer, of whatever audience, whatever energy the audience brings, the space and everything, is a special blend. But it was the original concept was, it was a collaboration between myself and a director whose theatre company it is, Brite Theatre, so director Kolbrun Sigfridsdottir, who's now living and working up in Edinburgh. But we were on the MFA together, that's where we met. And we had made a show together we got a little scholarship and a little bit of we won some award in Exeter, and we got to make a show called Shakespearean Hell, which was a mashup that we wrote, blending Dante's Inferno with complete works of Shakespeare. And so that imagined if Prospero at the end of The Tempest was actually dragged off to hell by Ariel as vengeance for his crimes against the spirits of the land. And then Ariel acts as your guide through the different circles of hell to the different characters that you might meet in there together. So Ariel's text between these circles of hell was all Dante, introducing which circle of hell this was and why they were in there. And then you'd have two characters from different plays come together, and we'd use text from those plays and steal bits from other places and repurpose it and mash it up and tell this very different dialogue. So it was a series of two-handers. And in the fifth circle of hell, the circle of the violent, we had Henry V and Richard III facing off against each other. And it was 5 female actors in there together, and all multi-rolling, and I played Richard in that. And I remember saying to Cole, I'd love to, there's more to explore here. And because the nature of that piece was that you had to make these characters instantly very recognizable, they were quite almost caricature versions of them, because you have to be able, if people are not necessarily that well versed in Shakespeare, they need to go, oh, that's Richard, that's Henry V. So I had, very pronounced hump, and it was very humorous, but a little, a little OTT, but it was the mood of the piece. It was a promenade thing, but it was as I really want to get in there and explore. And separately, I'd said, fancy the challenge of doing a one-person show, because at that point, I hadn't done any acting for 11 years, and I'd come back to this MFA, and then I just dove in. I was like, oh yes, I remember this, I love this. And so I was slowly building back up, and I was like, right, next challenge, solo show. And so those two ideas came, Kolbrun brought these two ideas together. And so after we finished that, it really was straight after we finished, it was the November 2014 when we'd both sort of finished with our course. Cole got us a residency at a theatre in Reykjavik, the Tjarnarbíó Theatre in, I'm saying it all wrong, I can't pronounce, I'm so sorry, I can't pronounce Icelandic.
I can't pronounce Icelandic either, so I think they're forgiving us.
But we had this open rehearsal process in Reykjavik. We had an open studio, and so people could come in and be part of our process. We had people to experiment on, see what worked with participation, what was too complicated, make it simpler, make it simpler. We started off with about 2 hours of text and then brought it down. Is this clear? Is it can we make it clear? If we really need it and we don't quite understand it, can we make it understandable? If we don't need it, it's gone.
Got it.
What can we do without? What do we really, really need? And how can we make this interaction work, and so forth? So we presented a work in progress of that in that theatre at the end of that 2 weeks for an Icelandic audience. And that's a great test, because if you've got an audience who isn't English speaking necessarily,
of course.
English isn't their first language, and you can make it clear, you got it. And
That's
then
so interesting. I'm extremely curious to delve a bit more inside the whole involving the audience concept. And I'm especially curious, and I think our audience as well, to understand how do usually audiences react to being brought inside the performance and the story, because of course I believe that their reactions shape the performance, and every night is different depending on the reactions you're getting from them. So I'm curious to know maybe the most memorable or the ones that have interested you mainly.
Yeah, it's different every time. Well, the way that it works, to begin with, you don't get time to just settle in and get comfy in your seat, because I'm already in the space as Richard. Ideally, there's been one or two, bearing in mind I've done this, goodness knows, over 200 times probably now, so in various different spaces. And maybe out once or twice I've had to do something slightly different. For the most part, I'll be in the space in character as you come in, and I will greet you in character. So instantly as you come in, it's, my dear Lady Anne, so pleasant to see you, and so nice to see you smiling upon me. And just lead people to their seats, give them their name tag. There's a little bit of information on the back there so they can read it. And then as you're doing, you can kind of gauge people's energy as they come in and start to get a sense of what they might fit in or how you might best use them. And bearing in mind, it's helpful in a way that I'm having to do everything in character, because Richard is very charming and he's very good at manipulating people.
Yeah, exactly. Mm-hmm.
So as Richard, I work with whatever they give me, but I also know that if I need to be very firm with them, I can be, or if I need to be very charming with them, I can be. And to be honest, if I make a mistake, if I've cast something a bit weird, or if I've had very little choice in the matter because it's such a small audience, I couldn't pick and choose, the show works just as well if they just sit in their seat and I talk to them in character. They don't. There's a few people, when there's places where I ideally need to bring them up on stage and certain things need to happen, that it's all very safely and clearly controlled by me. But if they really don't want to, or if they've got a leg problem and they can't stand or whatever, it can work just as well. So I just adapt around that. I'm going to give you the most recent example of fun things that happen. I mean, I've had Lady Anne's in the past, in the very, very early shows. I'll give you an example, 2 Lady Anne's, one from very early on in the very first UK performance, and one from just the other day. So I had a Lady Anne in Plymouth in, I think it was 2015 or 2016, very early on, who was a little tipsy. She'd had a lot of red wine, and she heckled in character, but heckled, and I had to kill her early because she was sort of ruining it for other people, because she was participating a bit too much. So there were scenes happening that she wasn't in. She was sat in the front row and she was watching stuff. But this is where early modern sort of principles of interaction come in, because in Shakespeare's time, people would have been shouting things up if they didn't like what was happening, or, no, look out, he's going to do... So I had this woman sat at the front saying, don't trust him. Don't you trust him. He'll have you. He'll have you. What did I say? I told you that would happen. It's like EastEnders, isn't it? And it was hilarious, but not always helpful. And so I did kill Lady Anne early. And to her credit, once she got the dead sticker, which is the mechanic that tells you that's when your character is dead, you get a dead sticker. And once she did shut up. So,
and she was quiet for the rest of the performance.
She was quiet. I was like, no, I did have to, you're dead now. That's it, you're dead. So every so often you have to go into teacher mode. It's like, nope.
That's so interesting. Cool.
The other day at Shakespeare North, there's a lady I met at the pool the day before or something, who came to the show, and she was a sort of an older lady. She was very lovely, and I made her Lady Anne, and then she was obviously a little bit reticent. And she was lovely, but I brought her up to do the charming of Lady Anne, and she was suitably reluctant, as she should be, but I really had to work. So she hid behind a curtain, and I had to coax her out like a cat. I was like, here, Lady Anne, here, puss, 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 puss. And then eventually I was like, right, no, stop that. Here.
And
Now.
did she not?
And she did. No,
Incredible.
come here, stay. Different approaches.
So interesting. I wish I was there.
But the impetus then, but the energy from that to go from that very hard work, which it should be for Richard in that moment,
Of course.
winning over Lady Anne, over the bleeding corpse of Henry VI. So it should be difficult. And so when you then go into, was ever woman in this human wood? Was ever woman in this human one? I'll have her, but I will not keep her long. You're like, there was real laughter in the audience because they've just seen.
It's incredible.
That's not a rehearsed smooth scene. I've had to like go, yeah,
you really have to work your magic on Lady Anne. So
yeah, they've really had to work. So whatever people bring to it works. It's freaking magic.
That's an incredible approach.
I've had such adventures and such a wonderful journey with this show.
So interesting. Speaking of interesting shows, because I would love to go on speaking about this Richard III. Maybe we should make another episode with you, Emily. But for now, let's leave our Richard apart for a moment, because I know you are embarking on a new project that will open in September that is called Caliban's Codex, right? Can you tell us something new, something about this production, how it works, what is particular about it?
Yes, well, it's not new. With all of these shows, there's like a pool of shows that if I have a little pocket in my schedule, I'm like, oh, well, maybe this will work, and I can just pull them up and put them on.
I meant new for the interview.
Yeah.
We haven't mentioned it before tonight.
So yeah, that's great. So with Richard III, there's a couple of shows that I've done with Colburn and with Brite Theatre that work in that particular way and that are particularly geared towards audience participation and immersion in that way. And Caliban's Codex is with a writer here who lives in St Leonards-on-Sea, Hastings, sort of. That was one of the first people I met when I moved here 6 or 7 years ago or whatever. So it's his writing and his sort of a collaboration, really, in terms of the staging of it is more of a collaboration between. I wouldn't say he didn't particularly direct it, but he was there as an outside eye. And it's a beautiful piece of very poetic writing. He's written it. It's not quite an iambic, but it hints at iambic. Very poetic. And it's the story, it's looking back on the events of the Tempest from Caliban's perspective, 14 years after those events. So Caliban has been left on the island on his own for all this time. And he's looking back over everything that happened, and he's trying to piece together the remnants of Prospero's books to teach himself magic so that he can save his island from the ravages of mankind. So it has a strong environmental message. It's very confrontational because Caliban is really about the shadow side of humanity. And so it's showing you sort of a dark mirror of what we are culpable in, you know, a dark mirror of ourselves, the darkness in all of our souls. Some people don't like that. It's very, so it isn't participative in the same sort of way, but it is direct address
to the audience. Yes.
And it's making the audience Prospero.
Oh.
But Prospero is as a representation of all of mankind. It's like, look what you've done. Look what you did. Look how you treated me, and look how you're treating the planet. With Caliban as Earth, you know, as the wild nature side of everything. And that just is, yes, so I'm taking that to Shakespeare North in September. It's not touring round or anything, but it's always there, sort of available. And I haven't done it it's a very physical show. I haven't done it for a while. So I'm going to be talking to John sort of this next week or two to see whether there's anything we want to change and all these shows are always they're living things. They're not set. They can always shift and grow and change and evolve.
And I'm glad you mentioned that is a very physical show, because actually one of my questions for you was how important physicality and movement are in making a performance alive. Because movement is something that some actors can even struggle with, because you need to basically leave your body and your personal movement behind and embrace the body and the movements of another person, namely the character.
But you also got to work with whatever you got.
Exactly. So how do you merge with the movements of the characters? How do you work with physicality and movement?
But can I tell you something really funny?
Of course.
So this year, so Richard III. This is going to be a slightly longer answer than I thought it was going to be. So Richard III, we developed the physicality went side by side with the character himself, and that it was all born from all of the work that Colburn did with me on forming that character that was outside of the play itself. We really explored what his life was before the events of the play, what his previous relationship with Lady Anne, all of those rejections, all of the hurtful insults that he'd been given, and the emotional reaction to that helped form the physicality. And that became the deformity down the left-hand side and an immense amount of pain, which was all down the left-hand side of the body, which sort of fueled this bitterness and this emptiness and this anger. This year, I have been, and I'm touching wood like crazy because it's starting to get better. I've been suffering from the most terrible sciatica. So terrible sciatica from the lower back. I've had a herniated disc. I could barely stand up straight. It happened just before a film shoot I was doing in the spring, shooting down my left leg, and this horrible pain down the left side.
Perfect timing.
And this year has been the year that I've come back to Richard III, completely coincidentally or synchronicity, who knows?
Yeah, that's interesting.
From being invited in January to go to Kansas City and perform it there, when I was still just getting over the first sort of bout of this sciatica. I'm like, well, if I've got to push through any show, then thank goodness it's Richard, because this is his pain. So whether the fact that I've been carrying that on and off over the years for such a long time in any way is what brought that, but I do believe in utterly embodying a character. So I just found it darkly hilarious that the worst pain and the worst health problems that I've had in my life have been down to a spine issue. And there was some scoliosis that the MRI scan found in there. So I was like, well, that's just too funny. But I think that particularly with Shakespeare, there can be a tendency with actors, because they think about it. So, that there's something quite heady about it, and people get stuck in their heads, and then it's all here. And no, you need to bring it into the whole of your body, not only as a resonator, but as an expressive force, and embody that whole character, not just the words coming out of your brain and out of your mouth. The words and the force of that character and the emotional life of that character and the needs of that character have to come through your whole body. And depending on how you work, because there are some actors that do work from the outside in, and that's perfectly valid and fine. For me, I work from the inside out. So it's forming the character inside and letting that inform the body. The body has to be engaged in that process. You can't separate it. And when the body is engaged in that process, you don't ever have to be on stage thinking, what should I do with my hands?
Yeah.
And if you don't know what to do, then just stay still.
Yeah, of course.
Just stillness is so powerful.
Yeah, and it's not a matter of building the movement, because movement is something instinctual that we have. I mean, now I'm moving my hands like this.
Well, you're Italian.
But because I'm Italian, exactly.
But I do as well. I mean, I'm like this when I'm talking, and I am not at all Italian, but I am in my hands.
Exactly. But that's not something I am controlling, and it's not something I am thinking about. It's just coming out of me. And for the character, it's basically the same.
Yes.
That's so interesting and cool. So since we have 5 more minutes before we open the floor from
Gosh.
questions from the audience,
Mhm.
I would like to ask you a question about your literary career,
Mhm.
especially on one of the topics you're writing about that I find extremely interesting and fascinating, that is Shakespeare and the supernatural.
Mm.
So, which is your approach on Shakespeare and supernatural, and which are, in your opinion, the main topics connected with this very, very big subject, because supernatural is extremely pervasive in Shakespeare, but also extremely mysterious. Like the ways in which supernatural is infused in his plays is extremely varied. And so, how did you tackle this huge topic?
Well, the supernatural is one small part of it. So
Mhm.
really what I was looking at was the mystery content, the esoteric content, the sort of the underlying philosophical, the occult philosophy of the time and how that's reflected in the works. And part of that was the wonderful supernatural stuff. So if we're talking supernatural, we're talking maybe the fairies and the ghosts and the witches
Like
and
the
so
top of the
forth.
iceberg, basically.
But that's one part of it. But all through Shakespeare's works is this rich seam of understanding of something deeper, the deeper meaning beneath things. So the alchemical symbolism and the hermetic symbolism, so astrology, the elements, and the Kabbalah, and so forth. So that Jewish mysticism that was taken from the Jewish people as they sort of co-opted cultural appropriation in its early days, from the Jewish people as they sort of were ostracized from their own lands and came over here. So those Christianized versions of the Kabbalah, and there's sort of a deeper wisdom there and another level of understanding. Shakespeare's very good at writing. He's very good. Shakespeare was wonderful at writing sort of multiple layers of meaning for different audiences. And so if you have some understanding of these occult philosophies of the time, it's like a key in to this other level of understanding and this wisdom about human nature. So you have characters that might tell you what planet that they're born under, or talking of the supernatural, if we look at Hamlet, for example, the importance of the ghost and the appearance of ghost in Hamlet, not only immensely important to that story that you believe that that ghost is real, but Shakespeare gives you particular things in the play to say to you, you need to know that this is real. But what that ghost represents as that changing point in philosophy between the Catholic and the Protestant, the old beliefs and the new coming in, the shift from the old folkloric and much more esoteric beliefs into the humanist rational philosophy that was coming from Wittenberg. So that was the birthplace of humanist philosophy, where he has Hamlet and Horatio be students, and Horatio being one of the first people that sees the ghost and believes it, you know that that ghost is meant to be real, and how that has to influence then our understanding of what he's saying with that, how he uses that ghost. The original meaning of the witches in Macbeth, people say, oh yes, well, Shakespeare wrote a play with witches in to appeal to James I because he was obsessed with witches. Sure. But if we, on a deeper level, then look at what the witches actually do in that play, they just show Macbeth himself. They don't say, do you know what would be great, Macbeth, would be if you went and did some bloody murders? They say, that shalt be king hereafter. They're the fates.
Yeah, of course.
They don't say, you should really go and get stabby up in Duncan.
No, they never say such a thing. That's his.
No, they just are
That's
there as
Clive's interpretation of the whole thing,
yes,
because they just stated what was meant to be. He could have
yes.
just it
He
and
could have just had a lovely dinner and
exactly.
everybody would have been fine. Maybe Duncan would have choked on something. We don't know. But anyway, yeah, And the Tempest and the later plays are richly magical. And the more that we understand of how perhaps the elements are at play within the Tempest, and what that means in terms of what the alchemical journey is, from separation, purification, and rejoining again, and a sacred marriage at the end, the formula of all of the comedies. So some plays that you might not necessarily think of as being particularly magical actually follow this alchemical journey towards this sacred marriage and unity at the end. There's deeper journeys to be found if you care to look for them. I was lucky enough to go on a pilgrimage to, well, first of all to Sicily and then to Verona with Mark Rylance and his sort of spiritual teacher, Peter Dawkins. We explored the mysteries of the Winter's Tale and the landscape of Sicily itself, and enacted it just for ourselves and for the land as a magical act over the course of a week, and gained profound understanding of it. And there's something so powerful. You don't necessarily need any other audience for that work to gain that understanding for yourself. Just the context of performance can also teach you a lot. And these works with that understanding can be performed in a sort of a ritual way of connection, just to deepen your own understanding and connection with the words and with the landscape or whatever. I mean, I could talk about this all night, but
No, I mean, that's extremely interesting. Also, before the beginning of the interview, we had that super interesting conversation about the energy of the performance location and locations and spots, and how they really affect the performance, because there is somehow a sort of stream of energy that like comes from the earth and the stones and wherever you are, and basically hits your body and affects your own personal energy. And that was one of
it's all part of the formula that comes together in that moment, in that time and in that space, to affect
exactly
everything.
Yeah. And that's, I think, what makes acting much more than just passion or a job. It's a real ritual somehow, and that's the reason why it was a ritual.
I think for some it's ego, for some it's art. But what is the, by my so potent art is what I called the book, The Magic of Shakespeare. Art is magic. And for me, to be an actor, truly, to embody those words and those characters and those worlds, is an act of magic. It's an act of transformation. And if you're good at it, you're not just transforming yourself, you're transforming the audience. You're taking them on a journey with you.
Yeah.
But yes, that first pilgrimage to Sicily is one of the reasons why I'd say The Winter's Tale is my favourite play, because that year I also got to perform that as part of my residency at the Globe, part of my MFA. We got to perform segments from a short version of The Winter's Tale on the Globe stage, and I was Leontes in that. And then I went that same year to Sicily with Mark Rylance, and I was Paulina to his Leontes, so I got to sort of embody both sides of that, which was extraordinary. But that journey, The Winter's Tale, is, if you look deeply into it, is Shakespeare's telling of the journey of Persephone from light into darkness, into the underworld, and re-emerging again. This is the journey of how the seasons come about, which is why The Winter's Tale is the perfect title for it.
This is just so fascinating. So fascinating. So I have a few questions from our...
Okay, great, lovely.
So let me see what the burning questions are. But I mean, we could talk like the whole night, as you
genuinely could, and we must sometime. Yeah.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, of course, absolutely. We'll make it happen. The first question I have from our audience is: do you have a favorite Shakespearean quote or passage that resonates with you personally?
Gosh, there are so many. I really, gosh, I don't know why, but I think because The Tempest is one of my favourite plays, and it's such a tiny little bit, but our revels now are ended, and that speech,
Yeah,
I just,
makes me cry all the times.
oh,
Like,
every time. And there's, at the end of Caliban's Codex, I drop character, and I at the story, Caliban tells his story, and then I drop character and just address the audience as myself, as actor on the stage. Our revels now are ended. These are actors, as I foretold you, were all spirits, and are melted into air, into thin air. And then because that play, as I was saying, Caliban's Codex is so much about humanity, that speech then becomes about how fragile our existence and this ecosystem that sustains us is, and how precious it is, this fragility.
yeah,
And so I often find myself, very emotional during that last little bit. But yeah, so it would be that, I think, if I
yeah.
had to choose
Yeah, yeah,
one.
of course. We have a very mean audience, and they're forcing you to choose
I
one choice.
know, so mean.
Let's see if the second question is less cruel. It's hello, Emily, first of all. Original theater practice seems to have been an influence on the productions you have devised. How has original theater practice affected the way you act in Shakespeare's plays?
Fundamentally. And I am so grateful to that MFA, and particularly to the 2 residencies at the Globe Theatre, for opening me up to that, to the shared light, what shared light with an audience means. When you're not, you're not illuminated on stage and the audience are out there in the darkness, to an extent now, so fundamentally, that I would find it quite disturbing and strange to perform in that very modern way of not being able to see the audience, because to me these words are written to be performed eye to eye, for me to find myself in you, the audience, for me to find my thoughts, for the audience to be the conscience or the motivation or the challenger or whatever they are fundamentally a part of it. And that when I experienced that shifted my whole understanding of not only how Shakespeare should be performed, but what it is to be an actor, And shared light is shared energy, isn't it? When we're sharing light and we can all see each other, then we're all held in that same energy together. And if I can just look you in the eyes and speak with you, not talk at you, but speak with you and have a conversation with you as the audience, then that just brings it so much more to life. And it shifts every time, because what's your reaction going to be if I, as Hamlet, sit next to you and say, to be or not to be? That is the question. What's your answer? What's your answer going to be? How are you energetically going to respond
Almost
to that?
show like I'm interested in your answer. It's not just that I am pretending. I want to know your point of view on this question, to be or not to be. That is the question. What do you think? And that's, I think, where the magic happens. I totally,
And
totally.
so it's magic. And so Richard III, that first solo audience participation piece, was really born out of that. And both Cole and I have this very sort of, not necessarily in our outward presentation, but in our principles, in our sort of, in our way of being, quite a punk. I mean, Cole was in the past very much more sort of outwardly punk, but this sort of punk attitude,
Yeah.
just is rip all of the fancy shit away and just give us something raw and real. So we wanted to do that. but this was absolutely informed by that early modern aesthetic. Is that okay? So we've learned this, we've done this, we've got shed light, we've done direct address. How much further can we push that? How can we really bring them in? We need to be able to respond. If we were performing on the Globe stage in the 16th or 17th century, you know, how would we respond to people throwing fruit at us or heckling or whatever would happen? How can we recreate that now with the theatre audiences that are so used to sitting in the dark?
Yeah, pretty absent.
Come and wake up, be with us. So it was taking that early modern performance principle and then bringing it into the postmodern. Shakespeare, I mean, really, those practices are the birth of what we think of as being that very postmodern meta. Shakespeare's immensely meta, and of those references that you have to put, if this was written in a play, you'd never believe it. There's so much of that in Shakespeare, you know, and those speeches are written to be directly addressed to the audience. So yeah, so taking that, skipping the early modern and dragging it into the postmodern and doing the best that we can now in a postmodern world to get as close to that experience of making that as real and as engaged and as visceral as we can in this world.
I couldn't agree more. Like, you're saying everything that makes my heart sing. So I have another very mean question, the ones that force you to choose. So they are curious to know which Shakespeare part and scene partner are on your bucket list. So a character.
Bucket list.
Yeah.
So one I haven't done yet.
Exactly. Yeah. If there is any.
Oh, well, I've been very lucky. I've been very, very lucky. Ooh. Do you know what? Okay, so if I get to make a wish, a magical wish that is absolutely unlikely to ever happen, what if it was play and scene partner?
Yeah.
Do you know what would be super cool? Super cool. Coriolanus with Judi Dench as Volumnia.
Yeah, that's a good.
I love her so much. She's
Yeah.
so magical and so just such a glorious soul. So that would be one. There's so many, you know, there's so many, but off the top of my head, because I'd love to play Coriolanus, and it's very unlikely,
oh my God, that's
very unlikely casting for me, but that's one I haven't done yet. So.
Well, I mean, I think we are very lucky nowadays that the unlikely casting doesn't seem to exist anymore, because you know, that kind of stiffness of roles of the romantic theater area seems.
Yeah, I mean, look, gender not so much, but I'm getting older, you know, so it's not so much the gender issue, but it's like I'm getting a bit older, and I think that we've got before age, unless you're Ian McKellen, who would also I'd love to work with, and I'd love to work with Mark again as well, but because he's magic. Mark is very magical, Mark Rylance. But yeah, unless you are a name, an established, heralded name like Ian McKellen, who obviously famously played Hamlet very recently, age blindness isn't going to be a thing, I don't think. So unless something happens in the next few years and I become elevated in status in the public eye, the chances of me being cast as Coriolanus are slim.
Yeah, well, fingers crossed. Just send the wish into the universe and maybe we'll make it happen.
Who knows?
So I have a very special guest sending a message that is not a question, but I want to read it for you because this is Marianne. She is an incredible actor. She's just, well, I don't know if I'm allowed to say that, but she's about to.
Sorry?
Oh yeah, well, she's about to graduate from drama school, so
Okay,
I'm
good.
sending her my best wishes for her career.
Yes,
And
me too. All the best
yeah,
wishes to you,
and
Marianne.
she wants to say that she loved your Richard and the audience involvement. So she was a part of your audience.
At
And
Shakespeare North or
I
somewhere
think
else?
so. I don't know, Marianne, if you can send us this information, but yeah, in
Oh,
London, in
gorgeous.
London.
Thank you. Thank you. That's lovely. Thank you so much. Because it's been around the world. I mean, it's been so many places. I've been so lucky. And I've met so many wonderful people. Do you know, God, that's been one of the real blessings of these shows, but particularly Richard, is how wherever I've gone in the world, just especially Verona, but Rome and Verona, because Italians are so
So we're
welcoming.
waiting
You
to
so
have
love
you back
family.
in Italy then.
But
Come anytime.
oh, thank you.
We'll-
But I've been made to feel like family wherever I've gone. I feel like I've made little pockets of family all around the world, no matter what the political tensions between countries might be. You know, there's one year I went to Pakistan and I went to St. Petersburg in Russia, and that I was lucky
We're
to meet people
lucky
think
that
quite near
art
good
can
friends.
still act as a sort of intercultural mediator. We're
Art,
lucky to have that.
it's art. It artists around the world were all connected by. It's
Exactly.
outside of politics. It's outside of everything. It's here, and that's really what it's all about.
So I think we have time for a couple of more questions if we keep them short, because I see that our audience has been very active, which makes me pleased.
That's good. Well, I'll try and keep my answer short so we can fit in
So
any
one
questions
question is, what's your favorite Shakespeare performance of all time? By performance, I think they mean
that I've seen.
like, yeah, that you've seen.
Oh my gosh. Um, I loved Andrew Scott's Hamlet. I don't know. There's going to be other things that come to me after this that I'm going to be. Oh wait, this. Okay, I'm going to give you a couple. I can't just pick one.
No problem. We'll allow that.
I can't. I loved Andrew Scott's Hamlet because I was sat like right at the back in the cheap seats, and I still felt like he was talking to me. And also, Juliet Stevenson as Gertrude was incredible, and Gertrude's a difficult role. It's
Very
very
difficult.
difficult to make Gertrude like alive, and you had very little to go on. And that whole production was gorgeous, and I loved it. The design was incredible, so I loved that. But also, I've got to say, A Midsummer Night's Dream at the Bridge, the immersive Midsummer Night's Dream at the Bridge, with it was such a celebration. I saw it during Pride when it was whenever that was pre-lockdown a few years ago, but that was such a beautiful, joyous production that I wept. Anything at the Globe, anything and everything at the Globe is normally. Oh, that's the one, right? So I knew there
The
was one.
one, we have the one.
Right,
Oh
the
my
one.
God.
I've got the one. Romeo and Juliet at the Globe. Was it last year or the year before? Directed by Ola Ince, who I was lucky enough to work with in December on a workshop. I think. Oh my gosh! You think you know the play? I know the play. I've been in the play. Romeo and Juliet. Everybody knows it. Dear gods, if anybody saw that, it was traumatizing. It was beautiful. It was fun, and then it was close to the point where there were people I know in the audience that wanted to just get up on the stage and stop them from doing it. I went with a big group of people who were all having, and we spent lockdown doing Shakespeare together. So if any of you, if you don't know, the show must go online. The entire works of Shakespeare are on
Oh, yeah.
YouTube.
I mean, it
Um,
was a guiding light, I think,
yeah,
doing.
so I was in a few of those. And so we are like a family, and an international family. And there was this big gathering of us, and we went to the Globe to see a couple of plays. And so we were all stood together, and collectively we were weeping. We were shaking. I mean, I was weeping and shaking for hours because I mean, my goth spring, as I call them, my child now is 20, but you know, they were a teenager at the time. And you felt it was so real, even though it was incredibly meta. And when the ending was, you really wanted to just shout out, no. There were people really just shouting and just crying. We were just absolutely shaken, like seeing it for the first time. Ah, so that's the one. I knew if there was, that's the one, quite a recent one. Oof,
My
oof.
God,
And those actors were incredible. But it's, you know, the Globe, but poof.
I wish to. So, one last question, if you can give us a couple of more minutes, just because we want to
Sure,
squeeze all the possible recommendations out of it.
sure.
So
Yeah.
this question is following on from the magic of Shakespeare. Do you have any other books on Shakespeare in the works or book recommendations, so that we can leave this interview with something concrete to work with?
Well, not in the works, but in the works. So the magic of Shakespeare that I wrote, I had the choice of, like, am I writing this for a general audience? Am I writing this for magical practitioners? Am I writing it for actors? Because these are quite different books. And I sort of went for, well, you know, actors will find it interesting, but it's sort of for the pagan / magical practitioner audience, or a general audience will find it interesting. And if they don't want to do the exercises, they don't have to. But the knowledge, it's sort of pitched at that level. It's not a theatre practice book, but equally something I'm very interested in and have been from since I was doing my MFA. And it's simply, I just need the resources, time and funding being one of those resources. What I'm really interested in is developing a training system for actors that draws on this wisdom to strengthen not only the physical and emotional bodies which we're trained in, but the spiritual body, using Western mystery tradition principles rather than, you know, necessarily the Eastern stuff that we've appropriated, yoga and so forth, which is quite commonplace in the theatrical industry. I'd like to, yeah, so specifically with Shakespeare, I think, develop something that is tuned into the philosophy of the time. And there's a book in that. And I'm also toying with, chewing around in my head, maybe an oracle deck, a Shakespeare Wisdom oracle deck with an accompanying, so it's sort of, yeah, that you could use for not only for divination but potentially character work and things. Authors I recommend, well, Ben Crystal, dear friend of mine, he's got a new book out, but all of his stuff, and Ben and David Crystal's works with the language. For anybody who needs a bit of help to make the language clear, their books are excellent too. So that would be a recommendation.
Thank you so much. I mean, I'm so sorry we need to close, because I could have gone on and on and on, and I think
Anybody who has outstanding questions, just find me on social media and message me, and I will.
Thank you so much. That's so generous of you, and I really hope that you will consider joining us again, maybe in the future, for another chat, a catch up on your projects and everything, because this was a really fulfilling conversation, like food for thought and for the soul. So
I'd
thank you.
love that. I've done a bit of Shakespeare on film, and I'm hoping, I mean, who knows, but there is a film adaptation of Timon of Athens that we shot a year ago that I'm hoping will be out in the next year or two. So it might be fun to talk about the couple of green screen Shakespeare's and acting
Absolutely.
on film, which is a very different thing from all of this theatre that we've been discussing. Perhaps that would be an
Thank you so
interesting
much
chat
for
for
I
some
mean,
young actors.
you said that. I didn't say that. So thank you. Yes, we accept. We will definitely look forward to hosting you again on the 60 Hour Shakespeare channel. So
Thank you.
before we close this off, I would like, of course, to thank Gavin Lee, our artistic director, and Charlotte Klein, our producer, because I wouldn't definitely be here without them. So I'm always very grateful for them for creating the 60 Hour Shakespeare family. And we are about to have our August productions. So one will be Othello and another one will be Queen Margaret, the War of the Roses. So I warmly encourage the audience to go and check the 60 Hour Shakespeare website and socials for tickets and information. Again, I want to thank Helping Hands for partnering up with us for this call, and we really hope we can help them with tonight's chat with Emily. So thank you very much to anyone who has been with us and asked questions. Thank you for being so active. And yeah, I'm afraid that's all for tonight, but I think we will dream very beautiful dreams tonight after this fulfilling conversation. So thank you, Emily, and good luck on all your future projects, and welcome to the 60 Hour Shakespeare family.
Thank you. Thank you so much. It's been a delight talking with you, and I hope to see you again. Good luck with the summer. It sounds wonderful.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.